So, but before we get to our distinguished guests, it's time for the IP roundtable. So
IP in the news.
Yeah, that too. So the IP in the news is a story about copyrights today. And do you want to start off with the story?
Sure. So I was cruising the internet and I found from Plugged, your sardonic source for consumer tech stories on
your sardonic source for
consumer tech stories.
Right? What is a sardonic source?
So, kind of like sarcastic.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
At thenextweb.com. And this is a story by Callum Booth. So these crypto bros spent millions on this rare Dune book, right? We all know what Dune is, right?
Yeah, Dune is that sci-fi movie. They've made it a couple of times and they've got a series going, I think. So yeah, right. It's a sci-fi thing.
So they thought when they bought the book that it included all the copyright rights.
Right. So they bought an original copy, like one of the first copies of the Dune book. And they thought that they got all the copyrights with that by buying the book. So they had all these plans now to make a series and merch and the whole 9 yards. And they paid $3 million for the book. Right. So this is not just pocket change. And unfortunately, they only found out later that just buying the book doesn't entitle you to the rights to make the movies and etc.
Right. They wanted to make an animated series. They wanted to sell NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Those have been in the news lately and all that stuff. But you can't do that if you don't own the copyright.
That's right. And so I guess the IP takeaway from this segment is don't buy a book expecting that you own all the rights to it. So it's sort of like buying a version of a magazine, Sports Illustrated, and owning the publisher or something.
And it's always a good idea to talk to an attorney like Richard who does copyrights before, if you want to use anything in any sort of medium.
Yeah, well, they were crypto lords and obviously had a whole bunch of money to spend on something.
They didn't
like
spend
this.
anything on a lawyer. So okay.
Anyway, so much for that. It's time for Richard's roundtable. So you can either comment on the story or if you have a question about intellectual property, I'd be happy to address that. So why don't we start with our guest this evening, Emmy Wu. Emmy, welcome to the program.
Hello, I'm excited to be here.
Oh, great. Well, we're very happy to have you. So tell us, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, my first thought, honestly, is what the heck, major lapse in research. But also, I also immediately felt bad, when you go through the actions, assuming one thing, and then you get to the end of that journey, realizing that what you thought was true is completely not true. Having to redo everything, I can only imagine what they have to go through now.
Yeah, and to have this publicized the way it is would be, I think, a little embarrassing. Hopefully they feel secure in themselves and they can just kind of laugh off their $3 million mistake. So,
or say, that's what I meant to do all the time.
That's
you
right.
Guys were the ones who said this other stuff.
I'm suddenly a rare book collector.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting too, because with my background in film, I know how much clearance is required even just to show a tiny tag on a commercial, on a TV show, on a movie. So in my world, it seems ridiculous that you would even think that you would own the rights to that, but it sure makes for an interesting story.
For sure. So Brian, what are your thoughts on this?
If you don't think IP is sexy, you have to, if you're my age, hearken back to when the Beatles' George Harrison got sued because one of his songs on his very first album was the exact mirror of She's So Fine.
Right.
And I remember so it was My Sweet Lord. Remember that?
Yeah,
so all of a sudden, IP became a very big thing. If you're going to be in business, all kidding aside, you really have to pay attention to it. You can't be in business without paying attention to it because you have to make sure you're not stepping on somebody else's IP, which is not a very good thing unless you have a very big checkbook. So I agree with Emmy. I feel bad for these poor folks, and I really don't know who's counseling them, but they need to go to law school.
Wasn't me. I would never have let them do that. Jason, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's painful. Oops. Yeah, I agree with Brian there that, if you're going to do business, then you need to do your due diligence, and that seems a little bit like a drunken night's decision. but I do have a question. I do have a question for you about trademarks on company names and brands, and love
Sure.
to hear your opinion about the impact of not trademarking or trademarking your name, and what the risks are there of not trademarking your brand name.
Well, thank you very much for that question. It's a good one. And a lot of people have that same question. Trademarking, if you're going to make a substantial investment in your business, then you really need to, one, make sure that somebody else isn't using the name that you want to use and already has a trademark on it. And number two, that you actually do invest in a trademark. I mean, it's $2,500 maybe. And it does prevent other people from capitalizing on the brand equity that you've created. So if you've done a lot of advertising, you have a lot of packaging, all of that can be put at risk if the trademark's not handled properly. So it's a relatively small investment for a lot of safety. And so we recommend that people, get trademarks. And if you're a local business and you don't really plan on expanding, it may not make sense for you, but you really need to talk with somebody about it, because, even local businesses sometimes get into disputes.
Oh, yeah. Where are you located, Jason?
We're in Vancouver, Canada.
So that was what I was thinking, because I grew up in Seattle, so close.
Right.
I knew a lot of Canadians in college, but so you could get trademarks in Canada and the US for this.
Yep.
I don't know if you already have, but
Yeah, we actually haven't pursued trademarks. So that's, we've done all the due diligence of not buying a $3 million book that someone already owns. But we haven't actually gone to the point of protecting ourselves. So I was curious about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you should talk with an intellectual property professional about it, and I'm sure you have, but I'm sure that, we'd be happy to help you, but I can't say that on the air. So.
and I think it becomes more of a problem when you start making real money, because if people don't think you have money, they're not going to necessarily go after you. But if you start really getting popular, then watch out.
Right.
Yeah.
So Kenya, what are your thoughts?
So I'm curious to see or hear if this could have gone another way. So they spent all this money on this book, which I think is kind of crazy, because you can't even walk into Barnes and Noble and buy anything cheaply and think that you own it, right? So what is the alternative to what they could have done? So could they have negotiated ahead of time, like to have ownership of the usage of what was included in the book?
Well, that's really what they should have done. And they actually ended up, the estate of the author of the book actually sold the rights to another company in 2016. And then shortly after that, the movie Dune came out, right? And so the estate and the other company did it the right way. But they would have had to negotiate with the company that owns the rights now. And whether they could have gotten a license under the circumstances is anybody's guess. But that would be the only other option that I see under those circumstances. So I'm sure the other company has plans to do all of this, the same types of things, but they're out of luck.
Well, and I bet the copyright license was not cheap either. So
right.
I don't know what it cost, but I bet it was
probably cheaper than $3 million, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you can work out a deal where you give them a percentage of your profits and stuff. So that's the way I would go.
Anyway, well, thanks everybody for your comments. I think that was a great story, and it illustrates how intellectual property can really make you or break you. And if you're making purchases or uses of intangible assets like copyrights or technology, it always makes sense to check in with somebody to make sure you're doing it right.